Elena Vance was not supposed to see that folder. She had only walked into the study to collect the dinner tray, the same way she had every night for the past 4 months, moving quietly so she wouldn't disturb the man who barely spoke to her unless it was to correct something. But the folder was open on the desk, and her own name was sitting right there on the top page, next to a date she didn't recognize, next to a result she couldn't explain. Paternity confirmed. 99.98%. Her hands went cold. She had never taken a paternity test in her life. She had never needed one. And yet there it was, black ink on white paper, tying her name to a child she loved more than her own heartbeat, and to a man whose face she had only ever seen from across a dinner table, never once imagining he could be connected to her daughter in any way that mattered. Footsteps came down the hallway. Elena closed the folder so fast the papers nearly slid onto the floor, and by the time Damien Cole stepped into the doorway, she was standing there with the tray in her hands and her heart slamming so hard she was certain he could hear it. "You're still here," he said, not unkindly, just observing, the way he observed everything, like a man cataloging a room he already owned. "I was just leaving, Mr. Cole." He looked at her a moment too long. Then his eyes moved past her, to the desk, to the folder that was almost, back in its place. Something flickered across his face. Elena would spend the rest of the night trying to name that flicker, and she still wouldn't have an answer by morning. 3 years earlier, Elena had buried her sister on a Tuesday that felt too sunny for a funeral. Sophie had been 26, reckless in the way people are when they've never been told no, and she had come home from a summer in Boston pregnant, glowing, and completely unwilling to say who the father was. "He's not in the picture," was all Sophie ever said, laughing it off like it was nothing, like the question didn't matter. "It's just going to be me and her. That's enough." It wasn't enough, in the end, not the way any of them wanted. A car accident on a rain-slicked highway took Sophie 4 months after Lily was born, and Elena, 25, unmarried, working 2 jobs to finish a business degree she'd eventually abandon, became a mother overnight to a baby who wasn't biologically hers but who she loved so ferociously it frightened her. She never found out who Lily's father was. Sophie's phone had been wiped in the crash. Her friends said she'd been secretive about the relationship, cagey in a way that wasn't like her. Elena used to lie awake wondering if there was a man out there somewhere who had no idea his daughter existed, and whether that ignorance was a mercy or a theft. She had stopped wondering, mostly, by the time she took the housekeeping position at the Cole estate. She needed the money. Lily needed braces and dance lessons and a mother who wasn't drowning in bills, and the Cole household paid triple what any other family in the city offered for someone willing to cook, clean, and stay quiet. Damien Cole was 34, unmarried, and, according to every magazine that had ever profiled him, allergic to sentiment. He ran Cole Industries the way his grandfather had built it, with a discipline that bordered on cruelty, and he had a reputation for ending relationships before they became anything the tabloids could photograph. Elena had been warned, before she even started, not to expect warmth from him. "He's not cold," the previous housekeeper had told her on her last day. "He's just guarding something. I never figured out what." Elena hadn't cared to figure it out either, not until the night she saw her own name typed beneath a stranger's blood test. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark of her small apartment, Lily's soft breathing coming through the baby monitor from the next room. Even though Lily was 6 now and hadn't needed a monitor in years, Elena kept it anyway, an old habit born of fear she'd never fully released, and she turned the words over and over. Paternity confirmed. Whose paternity? Confirmed to what? It didn't make sense that the results carried her name. Unless it wasn't about her at all. Unless someone had used her name as a placeholder, a code, a lie. Unless the results were never really about her. They were about Lily. The next morning, Elena arrived at the estate early, her stomach in knots, telling herself she was imagining connections that weren't there. She let herself into the kitchen and found Damien already awake, standing at the window with a coffee he wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said without turning around. "Neither did you, from the look of that coffee." A small, surprised huff of breath. Almost a laugh. He turned to face her, and for the first time in 4 months, he actually looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, like he was searching for something in her face he hadn't let himself look for before. "Elena," he said slowly, "how old is your daughter?" The tray in her hands nearly slipped. 6. "Why do you ask?" "No reason." But his jaw tightened, and his eyes dropped, just briefly, to the folder-shaped absence on the desk in the next room, visible through the open door. "I have a proposal for you. A business one. I'd like you to hear me out before you say no." Elena's pulse spiked. "What kind of proposal?" Damien set down the coffee he hadn't touched and folded his arms, and when he spoke, his voice had the careful, rehearsed cadence of a man who had practiced this exact sentence in front of a mirror. "My grandmother's will requires that I be married within 90 days, or I forfeit controlling interest in coal industries to my cousin, Marcus, who will gut the company and sell it in pieces within a year. I need a wife. Not forever. Just long enough to satisfy the terms and secure the board. I would compensate you generously. Your daughter's future, her school, her health, everything, would be secured for life." For a moment Elena couldn't speak. Then the absurdity of it broke through the fear. "You want to marry your housekeeper." "I want to marry someone I trust not to betray me for money, and there are exactly 0 people in my life who fit that description except you." He said it flatly, like an admission that cost him something. "I know how it sounds. I know what I'm asking. But I need an answer by tomorrow." Elena thought of Lily. She thought of the folder. She thought of the word confirmed sitting on that page like a landmine she hadn't stepped on yet, only walked past. "I need to know something first," she said. "Last night, I saw a folder on your desk. Paternity results. My name was on it. I didn't take any test, Mr. Cole. So I need you to tell me why my name was there." The silence that followed lasted long enough that Elena's chest began to ache from holding her breath. "It wasn't your test," Damien said finally, quietly. "It was your daughter's. I had a private lab run it against a sample I've held onto for 6 years. I needed to know before I said anything to you. I needed to be certain." "Certain of what?" He looked at her the way a man looks at a door he's about to walk through knowing there's no walking back. "Certain that Lily is my daughter." The words landed like a physical blow, and Elena's mind scrambled backward through every conversation Sophie had ever had about the man she wouldn't name, every laugh, every evasion, every "he's not in the picture," and she understood, with sickening clarity, that Sophie hadn't been protecting herself from a broken heart. She had been protecting Damien Cole's secret. "You knew my sister," Elena whispered. "Sophie," Damien said, and her name in his mouth sounded like grief that had been rehearsed 1,000 times in private and never once spoken aloud. "I knew her as Sophie Reyes. She never knew my real name. I told her I was Daniel, a mid-level manager at one of my own companies. I did it because every woman who'd ever come near me in those years wanted something from coal industries, not from me, and Sophie was the first person in a decade who looked at me like I was just a man. I was a coward. I let the lie run longer than it should have. And then she left Boston without telling me, and I didn't know why, and by the time I hired someone to find her." His voice broke. Actually broke, cracking down the middle like something structural giving way. "She was already gone," Elena finished for him, her own voice barely a whisper. "She died before you found her." Damien nodded, and for the first time since Elena had met him, his composure fell away entirely, and she saw a man who had spent 3 years carrying a grief he'd never been allowed to name in public, because naming it meant admitting he'd fathered a child he'd never met, with a woman who died protecting a lie he'd told her. "I found out about the accident 8 months ago," he said. "A private investigator's routine background check on new hires flagged your name, Vance, Sophie's maiden name, and I nearly didn't think anything of it, until I saw a photo of your daughter at your last job's holiday event. She has Sophie's eyes. I've been staring at pictures of Sophie's eyes in my head for 6 years, Elena. I would know them anywhere." Elena's legs felt unsteady. "So the housekeeping job was never really about housekeeping," Damien admitted. I created a position I didn't need so I could watch her grow up from a distance without appending her life, without appending yours, until I had the courage to figure out what to do with the truth. I am not proud of the deception. But I needed time before I destroyed the only family she has left. Elena felt something rise in her chest that she couldn't fully name, not quite fury, not quite grief, something tangled between both. You've been lying to me for 4 months. Watching my daughter. Studying us. And you never said a word. I know. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To find out the man paying my salary has been quietly deciding my daughter's fate behind my back. I know, Damien said again, and this time his voice cracked on the words. I have spent 3 years grieving a woman I loved and lying about who I was to protect a company that has never once made me happy. I don't know how to undo any of that. I only know that the moment I confirmed Lily was mine, I could not let her go on believing her father simply vanished. She deserves better than the lie Sophie was forced to protect. And so do you. Elena sat down heavily in the chair by the window, her mind a storm of grief for a sister she thought she'd fully mourn and fury at a man who had orchestrated months of quiet surveillance disguised as employment. And the marriage proposal? Was that ever really about the company, or was it about keeping Lily close without ever telling the truth? Both, Damien said, unflinching, because apparently the one thing he refused to do now was lie to her again. I need the marriage to save the company. But I also I want, to be in my daughter's life. If marrying you gives me a legitimate reason to be there every day, to build something with her without ripping her world apart with a paternity scandal splashed across every tabloid in the country, then yes. I want that too. You want a lot of things from someone you've deceived for months. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight, Damien said. I'm asking you to consider what's best for her. I'll accept whatever terms you set. I'll sign whatever protects her and you. I only ask that you don't shut the door before you've heard everything. Elena didn't answer him that night. She went home, held Lily longer than usual at bedtime, and cried silently into her daughter's hair, mourning Sophie all over again, this time for a truth her sister had died still hiding. She said yes 11 days later, not because of the money, though the money would matter, and not because of the company, though she understood by then what its collapse would mean for hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with any of this. She said yes because she watched Damien Cole sit on the floor of his enormous, empty study playing a card game with Lily, losing on purpose, laughing at her daughter's small triumphant shriek of victory, and something in Elena's chest recognized, with a certainty she couldn't argue with, that whatever else this man was, he was trying, desperately and clumsily, to be a father. The wedding was small, private, and utterly unconvincing to no one who mattered, least of all Vivian Ashford. Vivian had been engaged to Damien 2 years earlier, before he'd broken it off with a coldness that still simmered in her the way old grease fires simmer beneath ash, invisible until someone stirs it. She arrived at the small courthouse ceremony uninvited, dressed like she was attending her own vindication, and cornered Elena by the coat check before the vows had even finished settling into the room. You have no idea what you've married into, Vivian said, smiling with her mouth only. Damien doesn't love. He calculates. Whatever he's told you, whatever fairy tale he's spun to get a woman desperate enough to say yes, ask yourself why a man like him needed a housekeeper instead of anyone in his actual world. I know exactly why, Elena said, holding Vivian's gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered. Do you? Vivian's smile sharpened. Ask him about the trust fund clause his grandmother added specifically for children. Ask him what happens to his inheritance if it's discovered he already has an heir he hid from the family for years. You might find your fairy tale has a rather ugly footnote. She left before Elena could respond, but the words lodged in Elena's chest like a splinter she couldn't stop touching with her tongue. That night, in the enormous house that was now, absurdly, hers, Elena found Damien in his study, the same desk, though the folder was long gone, replaced now by a framed photograph of the three of them from the courthouse steps, Lily grinning gap-toothed between them. Vivian cornered me today, Elena said. She mentioned a trust clause. About heirs. Damien's face went very still. She shouldn't have said anything. But it's true. He exhaled slowly, sitting down on the edge of the desk like his legs needed the support. My grandmother's will has a clause that if I father a child before marriage and conceal the child's existence from the family for financial gain, my inheritance is voided entirely, not reduced, voided, and the company reverts fully to Marcus, no board vote required. I didn't hide Lily's existence for financial gain, Elena. I hid it because I didn't know for certain until 8 months ago, and because revealing it wrong could have destroyed everything, including custody of my own daughter, before I'd even had the chance to know her. But if the family finds out you knew before the wedding and said nothing, Marcus will use it, Damien said grimly. He already suspects something. He's been asking questions about the timeline of the housekeeper hire that don't add up to a casual employment story. If he can prove I concealed Lily's paternity to protect my inheritance, he doesn't need a will contest. He gets everything, automatically, and I lose the company my grandfather built, the one that employs 4,000 people who have never done anything wrong except trust that I'd protect their jobs. Elena felt the walls of the marriage she'd entered for Lily's sake closing in around a fight that was far bigger than the two of them. So what do? We tell the family ourselves, Damien said. Before Marcus can weaponize it. We control the story instead of letting him write it for us. It should have been simple. It wasn't. The family gathering 3 weeks later, Cole relatives Elena had never met, arranged around a dinner table longer than her entire apartment, dissolved into chaos the moment Damien stood to speak, because Marcus had arrived early with a folder of his own, thicker than the one Elena had seen months before, containing photographs of Damien visiting the housekeeping agency months before Elena was ever hired there, private investigator logs, and a copy of the very paternity test Elena had stumbled upon by accident. He's known for 8 months, Marcus announced to the table, savoring every syllable. He orchestrated an employment position to surveil his own daughter, concealed her existence from this family, and married the mother only after his hand was forced by a will clause he's known about since he was 22. Ask yourselves, is this a man protecting his daughter, or a man protecting a fortune? The room turned toward Damien, and for the first time since Elena had known him, she watched him look genuinely afraid. I made mistakes, Damien said, his voice unsteady but not breaking. I should have come forward the day I confirmed Lily was mine. I was afraid of losing her before I'd even had the chance to know her, of a custody battle stacked against a man who'd been absent for 6 years through no real fault except ignorance, of destroying the one family she has left. Fear is not an excuse. But it is the truth, and I would rather stand here and tell you the truth badly than let Marcus tell you a lie smoothly. Pretty speech, Marcus said. Doesn't change the clause. It was Elena who spoke next, surprising herself as much as anyone at the table. May I say something? The room quieted, unused to the housekeeper-turned-wife having a voice at all, which was exactly the assumption Elena intended to burn down. My sister died protecting a lie Damien told her, out of a fear he's already admitted was cowardice, Elena said. I buried her not knowing who my niece's father was, raising a child alone while working 2 jobs, never once receiving a cent of support because the man responsible didn't know she existed. When he found out, he didn't run. He didn't pay someone to make the problem disappear. He got down on the floor of that ridiculous study and lost at cards to a 6-year-old on purpose so she'd laugh. If you want to punish him for 8 months of fear after a lifetime of loving her the moment he knew she was his, then perhaps this company deserves a Marcus at the helm instead of a Damien. But I don't think that's the family Damien's grandmother actually intended to protect with that clause. I think she was protecting children like Lily from fathers who never show up at all. Damien showed up. Late, imperfectly, but he showed up. That has to count for something, or the clause means nothing except cruelty. Silence held the table for a long, suspended moment. Then Damien's grandmother's oldest sister, a woman named Constance who Elena hadn't even realized was still alive until she spoke, cleared her throat from the far end of the table. I drafted that clause with Eleanor, she said, referring to Damien's late grandmother. We wrote it after watching too many Cole men treat children as inconvenient accidents to be quietly funded and quietly ignored. The clause was never meant to punish a father who chose his child. It was meant to punish those who chose money instead. She looked at Marcus with an expression that could have frozen the wine in every glass on the table. Marcus, dear, I believe what you've just demonstrated tonight is exactly the kind of man Eleanor wrote that clause to keep from ever running this company. Marcus's composure cracked for the first time. That's not, the will clearly states. I helped write the will, Constance said simply. I know precisely what it states, and precisely what it was for. The board will hear my recommendation on Monday, and I suspect they'll agree with me, given that I hold enough shares to make my recommendation rather difficult to ignore. Marcus left before dessert. The board vote, when it came, was not unanimous, and it was not without cost. Damien lost 2 seats to concessions he'd have to spend years rebuilding, and the scandal cost coal industries a difficult quarter of shaken investor confidence, but the company survived, and so, improbably, did the marriage that had begun as a contract. It was 6 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday that felt too sunny to hold any weight at all, that Elena found Damien in the garden behind the house, sitting on the same bench where Lily liked to hunt for ladybugs, holding something small in his hands. What's that? Elena asked, sitting beside him. He opened his palm. A photograph, worn soft at the edges, of Sophie laughing at something outside the frame, her hair catching light the exact way Lily's did on summer mornings. I kept this for 6 years, Damien said. I used to take it out on nights I couldn't sleep and wonder what happened to her, why she left without a word. I know now. I know she was protecting me from a truth I was too afraid to face myself. I don't think I ever properly thanked her for that, or apologized for making it necessary. Elena took the photograph gently, studying her sister's smile, feeling the old grief settle into something quieter, something closer to peace than pain. She'd be furious you waited this long to fall in love with your own daughter. She'd be furious about a lot of things, Damien admitted, a small broken laugh escaping him. But I hope, she'd forgive the ending. Lily has a father who shows up now. She has you. She has a family that chose her, loudly, in front of people who would have preferred she disappear quietly into a scandal. That has to be worth something. It is, Elena said. It's worth everything. They sat together as the afternoon light shifted gold across the garden, and somewhere inside the house, Lily's laughter rang out over something silly on television, careless and unburdened by any of the truths that had nearly buried her before she'd even had the chance to understand them. Elena thought, watching Damien watch the house with a tenderness that had taken 3 years of grief and 8 months of fear to finally arrive at honesty, that love rarely came wrapped the way people expected. Sometimes it came disguised as a housekeeping job. Sometimes it came 6 years too late, carried in the eyes of a child who would never fully know how close she'd come to growing up in the shadow of a lie instead of the light of a truth someone finally found the courage to tell. If there was a lesson buried in all of it, Elena thought, it was this: the truth costs something no matter when you tell it, but it always costs less than the silence that came before. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose the truth, and tell us in the comments the one moment in this story where you felt it change. Because somewhere, right now, someone is standing at the edge of a truth they're afraid to tell, and maybe, just maybe, this story is the nudge they needed to finally say it out loud.